I'd like to present another one of my sons, I believe, in the ministry. And that's Victor Cyrus Franklin, who is now at the General Commission on Religion and Race. Victor comes from the Methodist parsonage. His mom is a Methodist pastor in Tennessee. I first met him when he was a teenager, and his mom was the campus minister at Tennessee State University. Victor has served and led in the church give me the right title now, the campus ministry.
The chairperson, United Methodist Student Movement Steering Committee.
Okay, the chairperson of the United Methodist Student Movement Steering Committee. And for those of you that don't know what that is, if you participate in campus ministry on a college campus or a Wesley Foundation, there should be a chapter of the United Methodist Student Movement within that campus ministry. And then on the international level, as well as the national level, they assist the church in understanding what it is that we need to be doing on our college campuses. And so now Victor has graduated from seminary. You went to Gambler, right? All right. So now there are 3 Gammonites in the room. Chester, Victor, and myself. The school, if y'all don't know, the School of the Prophets, okay? That's why we act the way we do. Amen. Amen. A prophet is without honor. We're not going to go there. But I would like to present to you Victor Cyrus Franklin, the prophet in our midst. Amen.
All right, amen. That was quite an introduction from Reverend Mama Maxine Allen. I am so grateful and so honored to be here with all of you this morning. This is my first experience in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm so glad that I'm here for this purpose and for this gathering and for our time together, discerning, hearing from God how we're going to continue to move, as we say, from the General Commission on Religion and Race, move the United Methodist Church from racism to relationships, but also how this is a part of the Crossing Jordan movement. And so we're on our way to new places for new people as we discern God's call for us. So I'm just so glad and so happy to be here for this reason, for this time, and for this purpose. Reverend Mama already gave a little bit of information about myself, so I'd just like to share a little bit more with you about my story. Again, I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. My grandfather was a United Methodist pastor. My mother is a United Methodist pastor in Tennessee. We were very active in the Tennessee Conference as youth. As a PK, we know something about moving from church to church, moving from place to place, always meeting new people. But it reminds me of the scripture. One of my favorite scriptures is from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 43 through 46. And in that scripture, we hear about Jesus recruiting disciples. And Jesus recruits Philip. And Philip follows Jesus. And then Philip finds Nathanael and says, I have found the one whom the prophets spoke of, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth. And then Nathanael asks what for some of us may be a peculiar question, and that is, can anything good come from Nazareth? And some of us are more familiar with the King James Version, which asks, what good can come from Nazareth? And Philip's reply sticks with me, and the reply was very simple. The reply was, come and see. And some other versions read, see for yourself. And so when we talk about moving from racism to relationships, and when we talk about being an advocate for racial justice, and when we talk about being an advocate for inclusiveness in the church, it's in some respects it's just a matter of seeing for ourselves how God is moving in our lives and in the relationships that we have, and being challenged to follow that stranger, that man from Nazareth, that place where folks say can't nothing good come from there. but having enough courage to follow those places. And all of us have those kinds of stories. And I think in some respects, that's my story. It's a story of going from church to church, meeting new people and strange people, not sure if I'm going to be accepted and wondering how people are going to look at me because I'm the past son, eldest son of the pastor. It's a story of going to annual conferences and feeling like I really don't belong here because I'm too young anyway, and I don't know if there's a place for me here at the annual conference session. It's a story of even when my mom moved to campus ministry, and at that point we didn't know if we had a place, had a home, had a place where we could worship. But other congregations in the conference welcomed us with open arms, saying that the United Methodist Church is not just a local church, but we are a connectional church. And wherever you are, you have a home. As long as you're in the house of God, then you are home. I remember moving on and going into campus ministry, and with everything that I learned in my black church experience in United Methodism growing up, campus ministry pushed me and challenged me to be in relationship with folks, I'll be honest, who I didn't even know existed. By the time I was involved in the United Methodist Student Movement, I'm gaining friendship with Tongan folks. I'm gaining friendships and relationships with folks from Zimbabwe. I'm gaining friendships and relationships with folks who are Native American from Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. I'm learning about the history and the heritage of the Rio Grande Conference. And I'm in relationship with all these folks through this United Methodist connection. And it was amazing to me to realize what it really meant to be a part of the Christ Church Universal. And the United Methodist Church is the church that gave me that vision. The United Methodist Church is the church that gave me that sense of what it means to be inclusive and what it means to be an advocate for racial justice. Because if it weren't for the church, I'm not sure that I would have had that kind of experience and had that kind of exposure. And so what I would like to share at this moment, at this time, when we talk about young adult ministry, is just an approach that I've learned over these few years of my life. With regard to how we can actively, and approaches that we can actively engage young people to help them encounter Christ in this connectional church that we have. And so where we see our church as an asset to reaching young people rather than a limitation. So I'll just begin with this. When I reflect on reaching young people in general and young adults in particular, I'm reminded of a conversation I saw between two very important people, one being Toni Morrison, the author, novelist. She teaches at Princeton University, and the other being professor, philosopher, theologian, Cornel West. And I just want to show a clip of a conversation that they had in 2004 at the Nation Institute in New York City.
About getting out of the mess that we're in unless we engage the younger generation.
No question.
And the younger generation, they have a different vibe than a lot of us. They have a very different vibe.
But we need the language. We need the language. We have to talk.
We got to talk. And
there's a whole generation of us who never said anything.
Exactly.
To the younger people.
To the young folk. And they're just out there, they're struggling. They got unbelievable creativity and imagination, but trying to channel their moral outrage. They're locked into this market with this dominant market way of life, but they also know that it's empty and hollow in the end. All it is chains and bling bling. It's just what, it's what Nathaniel West called the paraphernalia of suffering. That's a powerful phrase. A powerful phrase. It really is. But he was getting at something that I think we've got to engage the younger generation with, because in some sense they're imitating us, our materialism, careerism, and so on. But in another sense, they also have grown up in a different kind of world. I mean, their world is so market saturated that it's hard for them to gain access to non-market values and activities that they can ascribe weight to, because everybody's gimme, gimme, gimme.
So I'm not surprised that young people, they don't know quite what you're talking about. That and sexualizing them.
Oh, absolutely.
To the point where it's unrecognizable. Children begin to look seductive. They act, when you begin to put 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds on the covers of adult magazines because they don't have the wrinkles. And then the parents who are trying to look like the children, and the children are looking like the parents. And, you know I sound a little old-fashioned, but still.
I think you sound moral and mature. It's a sick civilization.
It's all about products.
That would be so obsessed with the sexualization of his children, the targeting of his children as a constituency to consume, and think that somehow the future is going to be in mature hands, when they're 100% of the future.
Yeah,
that's not just short-sighted, that's pathological.
All right, any reflections from that clip? Anything that stood out for you?
Well, the part we said the paraphernalia of suffering, yeah, I really like that. They mostly eating. I Judy, your mic.
Okay, we're going to have the mic.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I got it. I can speak a little louder. When he said the paraphernalia of suffering, I really believe that was really true, because now everything is marketing. You need to change, you need to dress like this, and so forth. And it's like, I believe that really affects the youth now. And like, when you go to church, we look at people, okay, we need a suit now. So that suffering, all we could have is our shirt, our button up, that's what's in now, and Rockaway t-shirt. So it's like, that paraphernalia of suffering really does exist, and I really like what you said.
One of the things that really stood out for me, well, there were 2 points. One, when Dr. Morrison talks about how there are many of us who have never had a conversation with young people. We don't have the language. We don't even know how to talk to young adults and young people. And then the other piece is how young people are targeted by these consumerist forces, by these commercial forces through television, radio, movies, the internet, and they're targeted in very specific ways. And so as a result, the church, we find ourselves, well, how can we compete, right, with those kinds of forces? But I believe that some of us have attempted to respond creatively, and I would just like to show one example. Some of you may be familiar with it, but I would like to show one example that I've seen of church trying to respond creatively to that challenge.
Had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? Yo. now, fellows. Now, what's cooler than being cool? I can't hear you. I said, what's cooler than being cool?
Ice cold.
All right. Okay, now, ladies.
Yes.
Now, we are going to break this thing down in just a few seconds. Now, don't have me break this thing down for nothing. Here we go. Shake it, 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 shake it like a Polaroid picture. Sugar, shake it, 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 sugar, shake it like a Polaroid picture. Hey, Can't touch this. Break it down. Stop. Having time.
This is the last one. Last one.
It's getting hot in here, so take off all your robes. It's getting hot in here, so take off all your robes.
All right, can we give God some praise for the Funky Fresh Senior Choir? Amen. When I saw this video the first time, I could not stop laughing. I mean, I was on the floor. But it was exciting for me because whenever I showed this clip in intergenerational and interracial spaces, everybody in the room is on the same page. They found a way to find a language so that older white folks in the church are reaching out to younger folks of color in the church and found a way to find a bridge. And so what we have is this sacred space of the sanctuary and the organs and the robes and all these things that represent and symbolize the sacred. And then they are singing these profane new songs, right? All right. Well, many of us would regard as profane because they come out of popular culture, but it finds a bridge. It provides a bridge. It provides a way for us to begin to have some common ground across where we are racially, across class lines, across generational lines. And that just was a great illustration for me of some folks who are more of our seasoned folks reaching out and saying, I'm hearing what you're doing. I'm hearing your songs, and I don't want to push you away, but I want to find a way to build a relationship with you, right? But it also goes the other way. So I have one other, speaking of songs, we're going to have an exercise, right? And we're going to play a game, and it's a game that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. And the name of this game is Name That Tune. Name That Tune. So who knows the rules to Name That Tune? Anybody know the rules to Name That Tune? Okay, if you don't know the rules, I'll tell you the rules to name that tune. Name that tune is a very simple game. I play a snippet or a clip of a song or recording, and you all should name what song you hear. I'll just give you a short, brief, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe second clip, and you let me know what song you hear in that clip. Does that sound easy enough? Yeah. So you don't have to raise your hand. You can just yell it out. We can just proclaim it. You know, that's fine. That's fine. Let me make sure my audio is working, and excuse me, Patrick, which setting should I have for? Go to laptop. Laptop. Okay.
If you walk through the
Okay.
garden,
Okay. Anybody know this song?
you better watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon. Walk straight in there.
Blind Boys of Alabama, way down in the
If you
hole.
walk with
If you walk with Jesus, then He'll save your soul.
He'll save your soul. You gotta keep the devil.
Gotta keep the devil way down in the hole.
Down in the hole.
All right, all right. So name that. I became familiar with that song through a television series on HBO called The Wire, and that was the theme song, so to speak, for The Wire. Blind Boys of Alabama, way down in the hole. So I was introduced, you know, to the Blind Boys of Alabama through that show. So here we go. Name that tune. Very simple game. Here we go. Here's the clip. Whoa, whoa, whoa. All right. I hear Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Who are the artists?
Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell.
Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. Okay, Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. Here we go. We're gonna keep playing the song and let's see if we're on track. Here we go.
All I can ever be to you is the darkness that we know and this regret I got accustomed to. Once was the ride when we were at our height.
All right, this is actually a recording by an artist from the UK by the name of Amy Winehouse. Some of us are familiar with Amy Winehouse. She had the song Rehab, and she really needed to go to rehab. You know, but the name of her song was Tears Dry on Their Own. Tears Dry on Their Own. So we'll try it again. We'll work it out. We'll work it out. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. We'll try another one. We'll try another one. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. Okay, Shaft. Who did Shaft? Isaac Hayes. Okay, and I heard OJ's Backstabbers. Okay, and I heard Angie Stone.
Sampling OJ.
Okay. Well, let's keep playing. Let's keep playing. Yeah, so this is Angie Stone. Wish I Didn't Miss You. Right? And here's the OJs. All right, we're going to try a couple more. We're going to get this. We're going to try a couple more. We're going to try a couple more.
I see you in a lonely place. How can you be so blind? You're still regretting the love you left behind.
No takers?
Oh, darling,
Okay.
I've seen you
Now.
go through changes.
Okay, possibly Stevie Wonder, okay.
Each night.
All right, so some of my young adult folks, I think, would definitely be more familiar with this. All right. See, the name of this song is by a hip-hop artist from Chicago by the name of Common. The name of the song is The Light.
Yeah.
The Light.
Yeah.
The previous song was by a brother by the name of Bobby Caldwell, white brother actually. Bobby Caldwell, the name of the song was Open Your Eyes. Right?
Yeah. I never knew. So.
Okay, we're gonna. So I mean, as we see, these are just a few examples, right? But a lot of what we see in popular music now are contemporary artists who are sampling artists from generations past, right? There's a lot of debate about that. Some say that's stealing, right? That there's a lack of creativity there. Why can't they come up with something on their own, right? But I look at that as an opportunity. Because similar to what we see with the Funky Fresh Senior Choir, forging a relationship with younger generations by singing their songs, we have these younger artists who are forging relationships with older generations by reaching back to generations past, looking, researching, finding what resources may be helpful and available to them as they discern how to move in their present and future. Right? So in their minds, they're standing on their ancestors' shoulders versus the image that some of us have of young adults where they're just trying to push previous generations to the side. Younger generations, young adults are looking to older folks for guidance, for mentorship, for direction, for resources, for anything that they need. Anything that we're looking for, that we're asking for, we're looking for that relationship so that we can discern how to operate in our present, in our future. A couple more examples, real quick. To say this is not just something that younger people have done and are doing. Some of us may have heard this song at some point.
About Jesus, the man, about Jesus, who conquered the grave, about Jesus, he's fine, about Jesus, blind, about Jesus, made old death, about Jesus, behave.
So this is a group, gospel group, Bells of Joy. Let's talk about Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus. And somebody came along the way and decided to sample Let's Talk About Jesus and turn it into this.
Well, I got a woman way over town that's good to me.
All right, Ray Charles. Yeah. Some of us, many of us, younger folks, were really introduced to Ray Charles through the Jamie Foxx film, right? But he's looking around him, well, how can I get this new sound? So he goes to the church, gets this new sound.
When I'm in need. Yeah,
but it also goes both ways. There was a song that came out within this decade. Some of us may have heard a version of this. And there's a Negro spiritual.
That's good to me.
There's a Negro spiritual. I want Jesus to walk with me. And this is one choir's rendition of I Want Jesus to Walk with Me. Right, so that version was sampled by a brother by the name of Kanye West, who called the Grammy Award-winning Jesus Walk.
Jesus, Jesus, talk to me. Jesus, Jesus, talk to me. Come on.
This just so happens to be the remix of Jesus Walk featuring Common. Come on.
God showed me the way, now the devil can't break me down. Yeah.
So what I find so interesting about this sampling, and especially when we talk about sampling even Negro spirituals, is that through this sampling, we have a genealogy that we can track. We have a genealogy of folks who are singing to Jesus, praying for Jesus to walk with them as they seek liberation from slavery. In the version of Jesus, I Want Jesus to Walk With Me that I played, that was sung by a choir, the ARC Choir out of Brooklyn, New York. ARC stands for Addiction Rehabilitation Center. And it's a choir of folks who are struggling together to recover from drug and alcohol dependency. And they sang, I want Jesus to walk with me because I need Jesus to help me fight this addiction that I have. Kanye West hears this song with a friend of his by the name of Rhymefest, and they sampled it and they say, well, I need Jesus to walk with me through my struggles and through my trials and through my pains. And so we have a genealogy across generations, across hundreds of years, with that same story of Jesus walking with them. And we have young folks who are just looking, as was called in the hip-hop world, digging through the crates, the record vinyl crates, keeping vinyl records alive, all right? Looking for inspiration, looking for resources, looking for guidance as they discern how God is speaking to them in our moment, right? So what I want to try to make a case for is that when we talk about ministry with young adults, this is not a ministry that is exclusive to young adults. Amen. It's not a ministry for young adults, independent of the larger life of the church. But we're talking about an approach to young adult ministry that sees young adults as inclusive in the church. Okay. Young adults across racial backgrounds and heritage. Young adults across different ages, for that matter. Because some of us are 22 and some of us are 35, and there's a chasm between those years, right? So the approach that we should have with regard to young adults, again, is not one that quarantines young adults, but sees young adults as a vital part of the ministry of the church. And part of what I want to suggest is through these forms of media, young adults want to be a part of the church, but we just need to be sure that there's space for us to find our voice. And in this case, because this is a Crossing Jordan and Commission on Religion and Race event, find their prophetic voices. I'm going to move to this PowerPoint. And if we need to step in, and I'm trying to get this done in less than an hour, so I'm going to keep moving. But if we need to stop, just say something. All right, we need to stop.
And April will have the mic, so if you want to ask a question.
All right. I just want to begin, since we're here at Philander Smith College, I just want to begin with the Beloit College Mindset List. Very quickly, Beloit College, since 1998, has produced a mindset list to help folks who are working in the university system to prepare for the incoming freshman class. It's been doing this since 1998. And it becomes helpful for us who work in spaces with young adults, particularly college students, because it helps us to see how our worldview is not necessarily the worldview of the young people who are coming through our doors in universities. So as it says here, it was initially created as a reminder to faculty to be aware of dated references and quickly become a catalog of the rapidly changing worldview of a new generation. So for the class of 2014, these are some of the important pieces, or at least I felt they were important, that I pulled out. One, few in the class know how to write in cursive. When I was in school, I was taught how to write in cursive. I'm a young adult, but when we talk about this new incoming class, email is just too slow, and they seldom, if ever, use snail mail. Fergie is a pop singer, not a princess. All right? Their parents' favorite TV sitcoms have always been showing up in movies. Well, out there creating a new Hawaii Five-0, television series, sampling, reaching back, previous eras. Czechoslovakia has never existed. No Czechoslovakia. All right? But these are a list of items that I think may be more pertinent to our discussion with regard to Crossing Jordan and Commission on Religion and Race. With increasing numbers of ramps, braille signs, and handicapped parking spaces, the world has always been trying harder to accommodate people with disabilities. cross burning has always been deemed protected speech. American companies have always done business in Vietnam. And a quarter of young people under 18 have at least one immigrant parent. They aren't afraid of immigration unless it involves real aliens from another planet. All right. Any comments? What's in the name? These young people are a part of what many call or referring to as the millennial generation. So this is just shorthand for generation, for how generations have been demarcated by some. The millennial generation is a label that refers to those born after 1980, the first generation to come of age after the new millennium. Right? Generation X, adults born from 1965 through 1980. Xers are often depicted as savvy, entrepreneurial loners. Baby boomers. Any baby boomers in the house? All right. All right. Baby boomers, adults born from 1946 through 1964. The period begins following World War II and ends when the birth control pill enters the market. All right. Baby boomers are depicted as anti-establishment. That's where we get our advocacy heritage. All right. The silent generation, adults born from 1928 through 1945, the period that begins with the Great Depression through World War II. The silent generation, they're depicted, at least, as conformist with civic instincts. Greatest generation, those born before 1928, the generation that fought and won World War II. Now, of course, these are not official designations, official titles, and every single individual within these generations may not necessarily fit the descriptions that are laid out here, but it becomes helpful for some of us in terms of discerning how the changes and the shifts in culture inform the different worldviews that generations have. All right. Religion among the millennials. This is based on recent research from the Pew Research Center. Millennials are significantly more unaffiliated to religious institutions than Generation Xers, who were at a comparable point in their life cycle. We'll show a graph of that. Millennials are twice as religiously unaffiliated as baby boomers were as young adults. Young adults also attend religious services less often than older Americans, it says. And compared with their elders today, fewer young people say that religion is very important in their lives. So that fits what some of us see as religion and the church in particular not being important for young adults. And so this is a chart that shows how young people today, the millennial generation today, is less affiliated with religious institutions, with churches, as that same age demographic has been in years past. So the millennials are the blue line, 20%, previous generations below. Right. But also, though young adults pray less often than their elders do today, the number of young adults who say they pray every day rivals the portion of young people who said the same in prior decades, meaning when Generation Xers and when baby boomers and when the silent generation, when they were at the same age, they prayed at the same rate, so to speak. Prayed just as often, not less. Though belief in God is lower among young adults than among older adults, millennials say they believe in God with absolute certainty at rates similar to those seen among Generation Xers a decade before. Believe in God with absolute certainty at the same rates. This suggests that some of the religious differences between younger and older Americans today are not entirely generational, but just result in part from people's tendency to place greater emphasis on religion as they age. So the stereotype that we have often of young adults not being spiritual, not wanting to come to church, not wanting to believe in God, and I will say in particular, because we're Christian, not believing in Jesus, right? That's not necessarily the case. It's just the fact that they're young, and when we were a little younger, we had some questions too. All right? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name's C. McAdoo. The Pew Research Center is fine, but our demographics are so narrow. Has Religion and Race or the church considered doing our own research so that we can find out for those people who are in United Methodist pews? And I'm not saying it would be any different,
right,
but would that not be a consideration for not only this, but a lot of other things? Because I don't know where they're getting the demographics from in terms of denominationalism, but it seems like to me that some of this research should and could be done through the United Methodist Church so we could get a better feel of the people we're trying to get into the pews in the churches that we're in, because someone's there, how can we get other folks there? I'm just saying, is that a possibility that either Religion to Raise or the research division at the General Board could do its own research so we could get some United Methodist numbers and figures? Thank you.
That's a great question. That's something that has been a priority for me since I came into this position in the spring. So I've been in contact with the Division on Young People, with the General Board of Discipleship, as well as GCF&A, to work out getting that data so that we can base how we move forward in terms of a strategic plan with young adults in the church, how we can move forward based on that data. So that's in development. That's a question that I've raised since I've come in office.
Tell them what you're doing this afternoon.
One of the things I wanted to say, Victor, now we paid, the Connection on Table paid $400,000 to get people to do the survey and did the research. See, the Pew Foundation have a way of marketing their stuff. Our stuff, we send it right on to the archives. Now that stuff is out there. You know, $400,000 just a few years ago. But that happens with so much of our stuff. We can create this stuff, and then we place it. We feel like once we create it, you know, then we put it to the side, and it's done. And the next general conference goes on to something else and on to something else. But it's out there, and that would help us to.
Absolutely. So, and this afternoon, I'm doing a focus group with a group of young adults, you know, who are here to get some data and some anecdotal data that we can begin as a Religion and Race, as far as Religion and Race is concerned, to get that data, you know, on our end. So that is a priority for us. As Religion and Race, I would argue, we beef up our research, you know, and monitoring focus and emphasis. And so generational attitudes and such, that's definitely on our radar.
And let me say one other thing about that. We will have access to that data. That's why we attempted to encourage folks to bring their young adults with them, because this is going to go in a comprehensive plan. So that's why we try to encourage you to bring young adults, because what they say today will be a part of our comprehensive plan for this annual conference.
This slide is just a chart to show that young adults, it's daily prayer among young adults by decade. And what's very interesting here is that according to Pew, young adults actually pray more often. Young adults today actually pray more often than in generations past, at least the most immediate two. So you see 45% in the 2000s prayed daily, 40% in the 1990s, and 41% in the 1980s, right? So in terms of where young people are with regard to their spirituality, all right, Divisional Ministries of Young People, this responding to the Pew Research data. The way Associate General Secretary Mike Ratliff interprets the data says, young adults don't affiliate in the same way as adults older than 30. Membership in Sunday morning worship attendance are not the measurements we can use to gauge interest and participation. Young adults are extremely open to faith. It is, however, an openness that moves beyond traditional Christianity and embraces faith traditions and sometimes synthesizes their own version of faith. Does this mean that the church is doomed? Not necessarily, but it does mean today's young people require new relationships with the church. So he says in a recent informal poll, United Methodist young adults were asked what would make them feel welcome their first time in the church, and also what would be necessary for them to return. And based on his informal poll, importance of relationships, someone knows my name, authenticity of worship, style of worship was less important. That's critical, because saying we're going to have a contemporary service for young adults so we can get young adults may not necessarily want a contemporary service, because some of us are more traditional, right? But we just want to be in relationship with folks. I mean, and some of the folks in the room, if I'm wrong, let me know. All right. So that may be, some of us say, well, that's a gimmick to get me in, but that don't mean you're trying to be in a relationship with me or empower me to lead in any way, And he says a church that has purpose and is living it out. Those three things are what young adults expect. Just as an example of young folks, young adults working out their spirituality, not abandoning it, but working it out. How many of us have seen Super Size Me or heard about Super Size Me? All right. Super Size Me, for those who don't know, it's a documentary, brother by the name of Morgan Spurlock. News all over the place about how folks suing McDonald's for getting diabetes and other illnesses and sicknesses as a result of eating McDonald's. And so he raised the question, well, if I ate McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 30 days, what would that do to my body? I interpret it as a suffering servant kind of like, Lord, you can do that, and I'll learn from you, but I ain't going to, He was bruised for my transgression. I will not eat McDonald's anymore. But I'm watching this film, and before a chapter, just a slide, just before the chapter, all of a sudden I see this image of the Last Supper, remixed, right? And if we can, let's go across the table to see all the characters that we can recognize. So we'll begin on the far left. Who do we see? Tony the Tiger. Who's next? Anybody know? South Park. Eric, South Park. Okay, who's next? Krusty the Clown from The Simpsons, right? All right, who's next? Teletubbies. Okay. Who's next? Sylvester. Okay. Who's next? Lucy. Charlie Brown. Peanuts. All right. Who's next? Ronald McDonald. Sitting at the center of the table. All right. Next. Captain Crunch. All right. Who's next? Donald Duck. Next. Bugs Bunny. Next. Jesus. All right. Next. Bart Simpson. All right. Next. Charlie Brown and Mickey Mouse. So what do you think the artist of this image is trying to say? Cross-generational. Ronald McDonald is more. All right. Ronald McDonald is more important than Jesus.
These are our superheroes.
These are our heroes.
This is the priority in which we live our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because it talks about how we consume.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that's really interesting about the film is the film begins to look at systems and how, because of the systems in our culture impact our health, what kind of food we have access to and what we consume. So,
how much did the filmmaker gain weight?
Wow, I need to get the figures.
30 pounds?
Something like this, something like 30 pounds. And then, but it said his liver began to pickle. And if he continued to eat, the doctors were afraid that he might have a heart attack.
That's why we have a full
obese Ronald McDonald. Right.
How old a person is Morgansboro?
I believe at the time he was about 30, 31. Right. All right. So one could also make the case that they're making a statement about where is Jesus in our health. Right. The intersection of our life and our living and our health and what food we eat and consume. Right. I've used this with some youth groups, and some of them say, well, Jesus is where Judas is supposed to be. And so what is the challenge? What is Christ's call? So again, we have a film that's not necessarily about God, it's necessarily about Jesus, not necessarily about the church, but we have this sample of the Last Supper, drawing from, to make a theological statement, right? This is another image. This is from the album cover of a hip-hop group from Virginia called The Clips, right? And title of the album is Lord Willing. And if you notice, the two members of the group are sitting in the front seat of the car. Quite frankly, what they rhyme about selling drugs, they rhyme about selling crack, and that's the world that they know. You'll see the dilapidated buildings, in the background. You see the graffiti, and you see Jesus in the back seat of the convertible with a crown of thorns and holes in his hands. And the title of the album, I repeat, is Lord Willing. What statement are they trying to make? What theological statement are they trying to make through this image? All right.
Is that the VA all boarded up? The Veterans Administration all boarded up?
No, that's Virginia.
That's Virginia.
Virginia.
That's Virginia.
Yeah.
I think it's Lord willing that we'll get out.
Right. Lord willing that we'll get out. Or some would make the argument, some would make the case that if the Lord had a problem with it, the Lord would stop it. And obviously the Lord doesn't, because the Lord's sitting in the back seat. Right? Who put him back there? That's the question. But I would argue, I would submit that part of what they're wrestling with is something that those of us who've been in the church for some time and those of us who have all this great theological education, when you talk about two doctrines, one doctrines of total depravity and double predestination coming out of Calvinist tradition, right? What difference does it make to fight? What difference does it make to resist? What difference does it make? Because God has already assigned where we're going to be anyway. Right? So, again, we have these younger folks who are raising these deep, profound, theological questions, drawing from the resources that have been available to them, trying to work out their spirituality and their relationship with God, right, in very serious and very critical ways.
You have a question?
Sure, yes.
What I find fascinating about that is that image of Jesus in the back seat offends me as a church person. I don't see Jesus having anything to do with selling drugs, and yet they are wrestling with it. And so how do we in the church overcome our fear and our being offended, so that the church can be the place where this dialogue takes place? Because I think I want the church to be the place where that dialogue takes place. But there is a chasm, and I think we in the church struggle how to cross that chasm. I mean, first we've got to get over being offended and hear what you're saying, which is exciting. But then I don't know where to go from there.
Two things. Well, the first thing. My name is Harold Eichelberger, St. James out of Pine Bluff. Pleasure to meet all of you. Well, the first thing with this image, I do have this album, by the way. They're very talented gentlemen, young men. They've changed what they rap about a little bit more as time goes by. But I think it's important to notice the idea of Lord willing, in a sense, means if it's God's will, I'll get out. I can stop my lifestyle. That's the whole point of the image, and with Jesus in the back seat is that we're taking him with us. You see, Welcome to Virginia Beach is behind them. It's symbolizing them actually leaving where they're from and where they're going. And the second thing is, in speaking of the offended by the image, I'm offended by pretty much every image I've seen in a lot of churches in America because they're not culturally correct. And so we get offended too. So to me, that's more acceptable because that speaks to my generation. But I love stained glass windows. I think it's a deep beauty in it. But I get offended too. So I mean, it goes across all lines and all barriers across all generations.
Yes, Jeremy.
One thing we were talking about yesterday, and that's really just for the, I would say the older generation, is for them to be acceptive to the younger generation, because once again, we come with different styles, and a lot of times when we come to different churches, people, well, I'm not gonna say people, but most church members expect them to already have it together and know what's going on, when a lot of the younger generation really has not been in church. And so they come and expecting them to know what to do and how to talk and how to speak, and that's not always the case. And so one of the biggest things is to accept them and to understand where they come from, and also help them to get to a certain level, realize that they may not ever get to the level you are, but to help them get to a certain level where they feel comfortable in worshiping God where they are. And that's one of the biggest things, because a lot of churches expect them to come in, and when they come in, they expect them to do certain things, and it's like, you know what, I don't know this, so I'm not coming back. And so that's one of the biggest things that young people, youth, all over the world, that's one of the biggest issues that we have, is coming in trying to expect them to already know what to do or how to do a certain type of worship style.
And just to piggyback on that, I would also submit that, piggybacking on that, I would also submit that, again, these kinds of images raise questions about God, questions about the world, questions about my place in the world, questions about what purpose God has for my life, considering what I see around me day to day, right? And a lot of times these questions frighten many of us because we don't have answers to these questions. And many of us have learned from the time that we were little that as soon as you raise a question, you better find a way to push that question to the side, because if you raise it, you're going to make somebody mad, right? Because that's not acceptable here, right? But young people exercising a deep spirituality are raising profound questions that push us, those of us who, whether we're young adult or older adult or whomever, it pushes us to wrestle with those deep questions as well. Questions that we would much rather, and I would say this, especially those of us who are middle class and comfortable in our middle classness, we would much rather not ask. All right? So one question in theology, and I'm all about theology. I love the academy, right? But it's also, I would even go this far. I would say it's not just a theology, but God. Yes. Where is God? And some of us who are in the church, we know about the question, is there a balm in Gilead? Those kinds of questions are being raised. But they're not questions we don't necessarily know how to respond to, but we have resources to do that, yes.
And because we don't know how to respond to the person with the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mine isn't really a question so much as a comment. I can relate to the offense as a person of God and as a Christian. But on the other hand, I'm not so much offended by by where the person is, because the person got some of it right, really. I mean, he's got Christ, he's got a thorn, a crown of thorns, he's got a crucified Christ. He may not have Christ where we want him to be or where we think he should be in a person's life, but I'm not so much offended by that, because if he's an unsaved person, isn't it our responsibility as believers to get him to see the rest of the story? So I'm not so much offended by that, especially in light of the fact that you indicated that some young people don't even think of Jesus when they think of God. At least this young person, he got that. He got that. So I don't know. He's culturally sensitive.
I was just saying, because we don't know how to respond
often we shut down and we don't know how to build the relationships with the young people where we could learn the answers together. And we shut down and we shut them off because we don't know the answers and we don't want to look like we don't know what's going on.
And so with that, what's important is
Insult them.
right. And so what's important is we don't need to feel compelled to have the answers. We don't need to have the answers. But we can be in relationship as we seek God and seek Christ, right, for direction. Okay.
We're going to keep going so he can finish the presentation and pick up questions and answers on the end, if y'all don't mind.
All right.
Please.
All right. Yeah, I don't have them watch on me, so help. Appreciate it. Pew Research data, great. Nothing on race so far, right? What about race? New face of America. America, as we all know, is becoming less white, right? For millennials who are ages 18 to 29, white folks are 61% of the U.S. population. 30 and older, 70%. That's a 9% decrease in just that one generation, right? And we see the more diversity of folks, especially from Latino, Hispanic heritages, and Black heritages as well. The rise in the number of people of color does not necessarily translate to increased intergroup contact, however. Neighborhoods and schools and religious institutions tend to be racially segregated. Children of all groups are being raised in environments where their own group size is inflated and where they are underexposed to children of other racial ethnic backgrounds. So though there seems to be more diversity and more openness to diversity, the truth of the matter is the majority of us are still in communities of our own racial ethnic heritage and background, and we don't do much interaction outside of that for the majority of us. All right, so while some of us see the fruition of this beloved community, in reality, what we see in far too many places is there's not much inclusiveness. Right? I just have to say the picture at the bottom, that's my son and his friend, Andrew. Just have to say that. At the grocery store. All right.
Which one's your son?
On the left. On the left. All right. All right, yeah. Yeah, Newsweek cover. Crazy. Millennial generation has grown up with more mixed messages about race and race relations than perhaps any previous generation. There's an example. This is from Ellen Broido, Understanding Diversity in Millennial Students. She talks about the generation experienced the uprising of the South Central Los Angeles in April of '92. I was in high school at that time, and I remember the teachers being instructed not to let the television, keep the television on or the radio on while the riots were going on, and they did it anyway. I remember the same thing with the O.J. Simpson verdict. They did it anyway. I was in middle school during the L.A. riots and high school during the O.J. Simpson verdict, and they did it anyway. And I went to a very diverse middle school and high school. And here we are having debates, about race and racism and privilege, as middle and high school students in Nashville, Tennessee, with what's going on way on the other side of the country, in Los Angeles. And having for us what was a very confusing time. Because as we saw especially between blacks and whites in this country, black folks defending OJ, many white folks, outraged, that was playing out in the student body, at the school. Same thing with affirmative action. I attended a magnet school, actually, in Nashville, Tennessee, a school that was created to be a diverse school. And we had questions then about whether or not we had a merit to get in the school because we were there due to affirmative action, wrestling with those questions at 15, 16 years old, just going to school. Immigration debates invariably cast in racialized terms, right? Young people wrestling with these racial questions with no clear answers, no clear answer on who's right and who's wrong, necessarily, but sorting our ways through it without any kind of mass movement behind them to kind of lead and guide them, right? This is just what's going on in the culture. And then you end up with Newsweek covers, it's your baby race, right? It's a confusing time for many young people. But our challenge says the millennial generation indeed represents a watershed moment in American society, and I would argue globally as well. On the one hand, they might replicate the racial and ethnic and cultural splintering of our country. That's possible. On the other hand, millennials have the opportunity to draw upon their shared institutional beliefs and cultural practices and help the country heal its racial ethnic divides. This writer, C.N. Lee, I believe that this would be the primary challenge and the ultimate legacy of this generation. Right? There's no guarantees which way it will go. All right. C.N. Lee, L.E. And the piece is Racial Characteristics and Attitudes of the Millennial Generation. Yeah. And there's some images of folks from the current United Methodist Student Movement steering committee. All right. This is their challenge. This is our challenge. I do my best to keep up with what's going on and from different cultural and racial ethnic perspectives. And so with social networking technologies, Twitter, blogging, Facebook, it becomes a real way to see and hear some perspectives and voices. And there's a blog called nextgenerationchurch.com. nextgenerationchurch.com. And there's a post that's actually up right now by one of the members of their blogging team that I found that I think can be very instructive for how we move forward. And this person says, I want to be part of an Asian American community that asks hard questions about faith, that wrestles with God like Jacob did. I want to affirm the wonderful traditions of my ancestors and the ancestors of my ancestors' neighboring countries. I want to know how a God-incarnated poor Jewish man relates to my hyphenated American identity. And I want to collectively extend the arm of humble love and hopeful peace with our Black American siblings, as there's so much pain and mystery between our two peoples. And so this young person says, I want to be a part of an Asian American community, but I also want to be a part of a global community beyond my Asian American heritage. I want to have an identity, an understanding of God. How does Jesus matter to my life and my time, right here and now? And how can I be in relationship with folks who may not be even in my racial ethnic heritage and find common ground? From racism to relationships, right? So millennial church leaders desire, I would argue, these three things. One, a spiritual practice informed but not determined by our Christian heritage. What does that mean?
Free to think and be and shape according to who you are.
Which means that not abandoning the church, not abandoning Christianity, not abandoning Jesus, right? But to learn from all of that in discerning how to move forward. Like the sampling exercise earlier, right? I'm reaching back. I'm finding my faith. I'm seeing how God is moving in my life. I'm reaching back. But I don't want it to be pre-programmed, because at that point it's not authentic. I'm just rehearsing what's been done in the past. But I want to learn from my past and move forward. Second, racial and cultural affirmation. That's a priority. I want to be affirmed in who I am and my heritage. And I would argue that's not just a question of African American folks and Asian American folks and Latino folks, but I would argue even for white young people, right? Because far too often whiteness is just such a blanket term that disregards the ethnic heritage of folks who come from white cultures. Folks have Scottish heritages and Irish heritages, and British heritages. Some folks immigrated from Australia. Some folks families were missionaries in Brazil and then came up. There's variety of experiences even there, and that needs to be affirmed, right? Instead of just a blanket cast that's everybody's supposed to fit in. Same thing for African Americans. We have folks, when we go down the floor, Haitian Americans, right? Jamaican Americans, Brazilian Americans, folks from all kinds of different cultures. And we try to have a blanket one-size-fits-all approach. But we don't really affirm people. Folk want to be affirmed where they are. But not just racial and cultural affirmation, but also cross-cultural collaboration. We want to be a part of something that keeps me rooted. As some would argue, we have roots, R-O-O-T-S, and roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. Right? I want to be rooted, but I also want to be connected. I want to spread out. I want to see and experience different folks. One reason United Methodists are able to accomplish great things is the church's emphasis on connectionalism. It is common to hear United Methodist leaders speak of the denomination as the connection. This concept has been central to Methodism from its beginning. No local church is the total body of Christ. Local United Methodist churches are bound together by a common mission and common governance that accomplish reaching out into the world. United Methodist churches and organizations partner in mission with each other and with other denominations. We have an ecumenical heritage. To engage new voices, United Methodist congregations must live into our connectional vision. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is we have local church congregations that provide that sense of cultural affirmation that helps give us roots. But what young people, in my experience, become really excited about is the opportunity to live into the connection that the United Methodist Church can provide. This has happened to me with local church ministries and with campus ministries as well. Speaking about Tennessee State University, Wesley Foundation Campus Ministry, the majority of the students at the Wesley Foundation were not even United Methodists. But the students who came and participated saw strength in being able to have experiences with folks from a variety of experiences that they wouldn't have had with the other campus ministry options that were available. So you have folks coming from Pentecostal backgrounds, and they would go with us on a retreat and be like, look at all these folks, where they come from. You know? And find strength in that. We would partner with other Wesley Foundations in the Tennessee Conference around this and develop friendships. I remember one of my best friends, he referred to himself as Will the Thrill from Cedar Hill. And he would go around, he would come to Tennessee State University, HBCU, right? He would come to Tennessee State, he'd hang out at the Wesley Foundation, folk would walk in the door, he said, just call me Redneck, that's fine. We're like, man, we can't call you that, man, what? You know. But it was his way of breaking the ice. And next thing you know, we're forming these relationships with folks. And so folks thought we were just some little pocket campus ministry. But we were integrated into the entire life of the conference, right? Engaging new voices, new opportunities for ministry and in this connectional vision. Through our connectional structure, the United Methodist Church is positioned to have a transformative impact on the lives of young people. And through an emphasis on connectionalism, we inspire young people to become Christ-led advocates for racial justice. What can we do? Build relationships and partner with other congregations that affirm the racial ethnic heritages of our young people. That's key. Because no congregation is an island. No local church is an island. Young people are able to get a sense of what it means to be a part of the larger body of Christ just by working and collaborating with other congregations to do that work. Develop partnerships and coordinate activities with other racial, ethnic, and white congregations throughout the conference. Helps young people to get a vision of the church that is broad in scope and vision and in ministry, such that they can see that what we do is not just about what we do on our corner, but it's about a ministry and a call to where the world truly is our parish, right? Working collaboratively through our connectional system. intra-racial within the racial group, and interracial between racial groups. Church collaboration helps young people discover a connection to the church that is wider and deeper than involvement in their local congregation exclusively, but to the church universal. We have an opportunity, and we are doing that in many places, right, to present that vision of ministry and a call to our young people. So connectionalism becomes an opportunity for collaboration. So anything, whether it's a youth lock-in, whether it's a Bible study, whether it's bowling, whether it's a retreat, whether it's a coffee house or a poetry night, whether it's a mission outreach event, participation in a march or in a protest, all of them become opportunities for spiritual transformation, racial and cultural affirmation, and racial and cultural collaboration. Things that we expect, things that we normally do, can become those inclusive spaces for young people to have these encounters and build those relationships. Often, Conference Council on Youth Ministries events are not racially inclusive in leadership and organization. As a result, youth of color and whites seeking diversity often do not want to participate in Conference Council on Youth Ministry events as a result. But when congregations organize collaborations that affirm racial, ethnic, and cultural heritages and interracial cultural and collaboration, we can also organize to ensure diverse participation and even leadership at conference events. That's possible. Okay, this is a story. I'll say this is my story, all right? And you might see me, that's me over there in the far right in the corner with that blank stare on my face. That's me when I was 16 years old, all right? This is my story. Late 1990s, youth workers and youth from 3 African-American congregations in the Tennessee Conference shared common frustration with CCYM events. We would go to the events, we'd be the only black church there, the only church of color there, and we say, we don't want to go anymore because there's nothing there for us. We ended up having conversations with other congregations who had the same story. So then the question became, well, what do we do? Well, one congregation organized a youth retreat every year, and they said, well, why don't y'all just come to our youth retreat? Over time, other congregations were invited, and 12 African-American local churches throughout the conference participated in this annual youth retreat, all over the conference, throughout Middle Tennessee. But in addition to planning and organizing this retreat, the youth workers and pastors advised the youth that we should still participate in conference-sponsored events. We're not to be segregated from the church, but we're part of the church, of the United Methodist Church in the Tennessee Conference. So as a result, those same congregations who organized and participated in that youth retreat every year sent their same young people to the major conference events. To the surprise of the conference staff, nearly 30 African-American youth from 5 different congregations would attend, for instance, the annual youth event. I remember that very vividly because they all thought we came from the same church. We said, no, well, you know, I'm from Dixon Memorial United Methodist Church, and they're from Braden United Methodist Church, and they're from all coming from different churches, different congregations, different places, and we end up going to the conference youth event. Surprised at where they come from. We didn't recruit these folks. What are they doing? We didn't have any intended outreach to reach them. What happens? So, in order to lend more structure to this loose collaboration between the congregations, a youth council was formed, sponsored by the Tennessee Conference chapter of the Black Methodist for Church Renewal. 10 minutes. All right, 10 minutes. Black Methodist for Church Renewal. Through this youth council and under the mentorship of the youth workers and pastors, we had collaborative lock-ins, Bible quiz bowls, mass choir, mission outreach, you name it. And through participation at the conference events, the African-American youth built ongoing relationships and collaborations with other racial ethnic groups within the conference. It was so, we would go to a conference event, people would ask, well, who are you and what do you do? We say, we're the BMCR Youth Council. Well, why don't you come to our church and tell us more about? So next thing you know, we have a crew of 4 or 5 youth who are driving around Middle Tennessee, going to different congregations, sharing about what we do and what our ministry is and looking for places to collaborate. And this was just us as youth doing this, right? And so, of particular note, with all of that work, to ensure inclusiveness in coordination with the conference events, the Youth Council decided to advocate for representation on the Conference Youth Council. To where to this day, there is a seat at the Conference Council on Youth Ministries, the Youth Council table, there is a seat reserved for voices of people of color in the planning and coordination of conference events. To this day, right? And so through what was just fun activities for the majority of us, we became advocates for change in our conference. Leadership emerged through the guidance and the support of the youth workers and the pastors, in that conference. As a result, we emerged as leaders in the church as we grew up, because we had a memory of that time when we were young people, where the church invested in us and changed our lives. So because we have that memory as young adults, we're still in the church today. Because that we have that memory of a connectional church, we see how we're not in this by ourselves on our corners, but we're a part of the church universal because we have that memory. So that becomes an opportunity for us to develop leaders. One of my favorite, Wesley's great, y'all, I love Wesley, I do, but one of my favorite theologians is Paul Tillich, right? And he writes in Communicating the Christian Message, one of his essays in Theology of Culture, the question cannot be, how do we communicate the gospel so that people will accept it? To communicate the gospel means putting it before people so that they are able to decide for or against it. The Christian gospel is a matter of decision. You either choose Christ or you don't. Right? All that we who communicate this gospel can do is to make it possible for genuine decision. By being in relationships and seeing collaboration and connectionalism as an opportunity, right, we are able to present the gospel as a matter of decision for young people. And that the Church of Jesus Christ through the United Methodist Church can be of strength and be of aid and be a resource to have strong roots so that in their lives and in our lives we can bear fruit. Right? So, just finish with Joel 2:28. I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. All right. I would argue that the Spirit of God is poured over all flesh when we're in intergenerational communication, building relationships through our connection to get a vision for what it means to really be the church of God and the beloved community. All right. How much time we got? 3?
You have 3, and then he's going to stop recording, and then we'll take a couple of questions.
All right. Okay. Questions, comments?